Welcome,
Mhm.
everyone. Welcome, everyone, to our 10th NAMA Millets Year of the Millets webinar for 2023. Welcome to everyone who's been here before and to folks who are here for the first time. We have a very interesting and challenging issue today. We're calling it Millets in Community and Economic Development, and two outstanding speakers who are right now overseas and relative to the U.S. We have Dr. Amrita Hazra, Associate Professor of Chemistry at the Indian Institute of Science Education and Research. And we have Nate Bloom, CEO of Sorghum United and former director of the Nebraska Grain Sorghum Board. I'll tell you a little bit more about each of those before they start speaking. I forgot to mention, I'm Jonathan Landak. I'm here with my colleagues, Joni Kenwell Moore and Don Osborne. The Millet Seminar from NAMA is co-sponsored by the Feast Lab at University of Missouri and the Center for Regenerative Agriculture, also at the University of Missouri. We have a nice, good attendance again today, and we'll jump right in here with, let me look at the chats and see if there's anything. Okay, great. We're going to start with Dr. Amrita Hazra. Let me say a few things about her. Amrita Hazra is Associate Professor in Departments of Chemistry and Biology at the Indian Institute of Science Education and Research in Pune, India. Amrita grew up in Pune in a household of scientists and was introduced to the importance of nutrition, access to food, and why agricultural and food diversity matters from early age. Amrita pursued her graduate studies at Cornell University in chemistry to explore the mechanism of vitamin B1 production in microbes, and her postdoctoral research was at the University of California, Berkeley in microbiology, exploring questions in vitamin B12 metabolism and sharing among microbes. Her academic experiences added to her inquisition on food and nutritional diversity and shaped her understanding of the economic and political influences that control farming today and dictate what food is available to consumers. Important issue in today's discussion. This has greatly shaped Amrita's ideas around food justice and sustainable agriculture. And in 2015 at Berkeley, along with her postdoctoral colleague, Patricia Bobner, faculty member Peggy Lemo, and generous support and funds from the Berkeley Food Institute, Amrita co-founded the Millet Project, which explores millets to diversify agriculture and our diets. The goal of the Millet Project is to rediscover the traditions of cultivating and consuming millets. I think that's a good jumping off point to start to hear what Amrita has to say with us today. Thank you again for being here, for being up so early in the morning in India. And the floor is all yours, Dr. Hazra. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Jonathan. And it's just a pleasure to be a part of this gathering and this set of webinars, which I think is so timely, and it's an excellent initiative to have throughout this year, this International Year of Millets. What I'll do very briefly in the next 15 minutes or so, I'll just start a timer for myself. I'll just introduce you to this one small initiative that we conducted as in some sense starry-eyed, idealistic students while we were at the University of California at Berkeley. It was called the Millet Project, and we initiated it in 2015 when the word millet was still sort of making headways into the community and the vocabulary, I feel, of food. And so I'll just give you a brief idea of what we were doing during this time. So I'm just going to switch off my video and just going back to what Nate was actually starting off with at the beginning before the talk started, that there are multiple reasons why this word has been rare in the vocabulary of agriculture and of consumers in the field, as well as of the people who eat it. And so I hope that some of what I'm saying may help us all to just get insights into changing that as we move ahead in this International Year of Millets. So I'm gonna change screen. How do I do that? Oops. Yeah, okay. So this year is the International Year of Millets, and this was an very important and vital move for us all, because it allows for some of the goals that I think all of us here align with. I'm not going to introduce millets as why it's important to us all, because I think we're all aligned in that. The goal mainly that the UN declaration aims at is to increase public awareness on the health benefits of millets and the suitability for cultivation under tough conditions marked by climate change, which is a word that we are unfortunately part of our conversation on an everyday basis now. So with these goals in mind, I feel this is really the broadest or the biggest aspects of also why the Millet Project was something that we started in 2015. It was because we realized that there was very less, there was low access to a diversity of cereals in our diet, as people who were living at that point in the United States. And secondly, there was very less diversity on the fields that we were experiencing as we were visiting and we were traveling around in the US. And we thought that was something that we needed to understand. So the Millet Project came out of a need for that in 2015. What are millets? I'm not going to spend any time introducing this, except just giving you an overview scientifically of why millets are different from the varieties of crops that we know more commonly as cereals in our diet. So wheat and rice belong to a classification of plants called C3 plants, and they are better suited to grow in temperate conditions, versus sorghum and millet and even corn, actually, which are C4 plants, and they are better suited to grow under tropical conditions. The reason being that C4 plants have a way to concentrate carbon dioxide, which forms the basis of the carbohydrates that are part of cereals that benefit us as consumers. The way by which these C4 plants like millets and sorghum fix carbon dioxide is way more efficient with regard to loss of water as compared to C3 plants like wheat and rice. And that is why growing C4 plants under climate change and drought type conditions makes more sense as compared to wheat and rice. So just with that sort of little primer, and the fact that millets do differ at a taxonomic level between from wheat and rice. So this is just, I'm showing you a phylogeny tree of the cereals, the common cereals that we consume. All the cereals that we consume belong to the Poaceae family, all the common cereals that we consume. Of which in the subfamily level, the differences start to arise between wheat and rice, which you can see on the top, versus corn, sorghum, and a list of all the millets that fall into the Panicoideae and the Chloridoideae subfamilies of family Poaceae. And the reason I put this up is to emphasize the nutrition part of why we need to be consuming more millets. Rice and wheat are phylogenetically even different from the other millets or the other cereals which we call millets, which means that they're going to also at a metabolic level have a slightly different range of nutrients and micronutrients that are essential for us humans for our health. And these 2 points, which is basically the taxonomic differences as well as the reason that the fact that they are C4 plants, are literally the scientific translations of the 2 main reasons why this International Year of Millets makes so much sense. So the fact that millets introduce more healthy alternatives to our nutrition choice. And secondly, they are able to provide more alternatives to the kind of things that we grow on our fields, and which are, drought tolerant and climate smart. Are the 2 reasons at the scientific level. These are sort of the interpretations of that. And this is what sort of drove us to start the Millet Project. So I'll with this, I'll just give you a quick idea of why and how we even initiated this whole thing. So this was 2015, and California was literally drying up. There were 4 years of severe drought, and there were still a lot of cash crops being grown that were highly water intensive. And that was something that was concerning to us as as people living in California at that time. And farmers, food activists, and consumers came together to start to think about this, because it was 4 continuous years and literally the water level was falling, and because of a rain deficit, and it was becoming more and more apparent that water is a large concern, and it's not okay to keep growing the things that just give you money, but you have to think about diversity at the level of agriculture, and consequently diversity at the level of food that we were eating. So the question that we decided to sort of come together with was, where have all the grains gone? Given that rice, wheat, and corn were mainly what or is still mainly what we eat as part of our diet. However fancy the package looks in the supermarket store, it still has mainly one of these components. And growing the same things over and over again, I'm preaching to the choir here, I'm sure, but they have consequences such as propagating monocultures and excessive irrigation and fertilizers and pesticides in our soil, and also a loss of diversity in our diet. Why millets? Why was millets the solution to many of the things that we were discussing? Was, of course, that they're naturally diverse as plants, because as I showed you, they fall within a separate subfamily, and they are sort of varying in among them. They're drought tolerant. There were at that point 4 varieties that we found were commonly being cultivated in the US. They have short crop cycles of 100 to 120 days. They're, of course, nutritious. They have a very varied content of micronutrients. I always put gluten-free last, because it's always thought to be a gluten-free grain, but I feel everybody, whether you can tolerate or not, you can tolerate gluten or not, you should be including millets in your diet. That, and of course, it's a very versatile grain with regard to its utility of being a food grain for humans, forage crop, cover crops, and things like that. Why not millets? So that's why we started to initially put out information about millets as a group of enthusiasts who were used to eating this grain growing up. So I grew up in India, as Jonathan said, and I was used to eating a lot of millet living in Pune, which is sort of the heart of sorghum and pearl millet. And also finger millet that is commonly grown in these areas. So as you can see here, I've just put up a quick chart, a visual of sort of the diversity of nutrients that are commonly sort of high found in or a diversity of nutrients that we look for in cereal grains that we consume. And as you can see, the carb content sort of varies across the grains, rice being the highest. But other micronutrients such as iron and calcium can be found in larger quantities in certain types of millets, which make this a great source of these nutrients, micronutrients mainly. Protein, fiber will match other whole grains. It's not like it's exceptionally high in millets, but it'll match other whole grains very well. Why not millets was literally the question that we were faced with when we were thinking about, what to do about the agricultural sort of scenario that we were all in 2015. So with a lot of support from a very large set of players, faculty members at the University of California, Berkeley Plant and Microbiology Department, Sheila McCormick, Peggy Limo, who was our main faculty mentor, and Sarah Hake, and support in the form of course, funding, but also a lot of ideating from Berkeley Food Institute. We were able to launch this Millet Project with a very diverse group of people. And that was something that really was a very big part of the journey, that we worked with, Gavin, who was an MBA student at the Haas Business School, faculty members, Sarah and Peggy, as they were very intently involved. Three of us, me, Pedro, and Patricia Bubna, we were part of the plant microbial biology department with a keen interest in food diversity, and an undergrad, Ramji Pasricha, when we started this off, so we came from a very large range of backgrounds, countries, ages, experience, which really added a lot to what the project was about. So what was the project about? We decided that we wanted to take a threefold approach to introducing this grain millet that many of us in the team had eaten growing up, were missing as part of our diet in the United States at that point. And we had to find it in these health food stores. It was expensive. When we asked around, people didn't know about the grain. They used to associate it with bird seed. That was the most common connotation. So we said, okay, let's see whether we can start to get this grain into people's vocabularies, farmers' vocabularies. So this was the threefold approach, which basically is we collaborated with farmers, and we collaborated with community members who were, interested in using millets as part of the food that they were making, and food that they were willing to sell. So entrepreneurs who were working with millets. And with that, we were then going to connect with the community, and sort of introduce them to the grain, and then hence by introducing to the grain, popularize the grain enough that farmers would be encouraged to cultivate it further. So that was sort of the approach that we decided to take. We started off in 2015 with planting in 6 different locations. One of them was at Berkeley, and this is our first venture at doing this at the Gill Tract Farm in Berkeley. We collaborated with farmers across northern, sort of surrounding us in California. The collaborators that we met were some of course, the best humans that I met during my stay in the US. Extremely enthusiastic, optimistic, and very hardworking people who were putting together these great ideas and efforts into community-based projects, which was one of the most valuable things that I learned from my association with them. Doug Moselle, who ran this very beautiful project in Mendocino called the Mendocino Grain Project. Mai, who was a previous UC Berkeley alum, who ran a very small farm called the Kafao Farm. Julia, the Millet Network of India, which was a partner for us in supporting our efforts at growing these millets. The main experiment, I'll tell you about one very quick experiment, which was part of what we did at Berkeley. So this was the Gill Tract Farm. And one of our goals was to figure out whether the different varieties of millets that we had access to easily as seeds in the US, how did they grow under various watering conditions? And so what we did for that is we took 5 lanes in our first year of experiment. The first 2 lanes we decided we would be using as drought conditions. The next 2 lanes would be 1/3 the watering that corn gets. And then the last lane would be what corn gets. And corn was our basis because it was another C4 plant that's commonly grown. And Giltract, the farm that we were using, had other rows of corn growing. So we thought that would be a good control. So the 5 rows are what you see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They were 200 feet each. How we planted was the first 1/4 was planted with foxtail millet. Next was pearl, next was proso, and next was Japanese. So each row had these 4 millets. And then we were droughting the entire row versus giving 1/3 water to the next 2 rows and so on. And then the water regime, the first row was droughted. The second row was watered, it was very reduced watering, and 3 and 4 and 5 were full watering as corn. We basically made sure that the birds didn't eat them, given that they were popularly known as bird seed, till we were able to get the plants to grow under these conditions. And we welcomed the community to come and participate in this project by, doing exhibits like what I'm showing here. And at the end of the growing season, which was about 110 days for when we took this photograph, the exhibit was sort of fully ready. So we had people come by, walk through the fields, look at the various rows and get a decent sense of which did these millets grow without any water and under the reduced water conditions as compared to the fully watered millets. So we gave them explanations of that. We exposed them to a wide variety of food that the community had made, that the group had made, and we collaborated with people to put forth so that people were not only seeing millets but also getting a taste of what millets were. The data that we collected from the field, we did very rough metadata collection where for the 3 conditions of growth, we measured plant height, number of years of millet per plant, and year weight. And we sort of did a statistical analysis of this. We had about 25 data sets per condition. What we could tell is that under reduced versus full watering conditions, there was not much difference in the year weight and the plant length. So the biomass of the plant and the year, which is the actual the cereal, the part which will have the cereal, those didn't vary much across the reduced watering and the full watering condition, which was an important experiment for us to do to prove to our farmer collaborators that it might be useful to use this grain when under droughted conditions, and also because it was, it just introduces so much diversity to your fields. Our findings indicated that pearl millet performed similarly under drought conditions and full water conditions. And pearl millet was also very resilient to, low water, followed by Japanese and foxtail millet. So this was basically what we had found. We collaborated with a range of people in the community, including brewers, Matt and Liz, who were brewers in the community at Berkeley at that point. We basically really put forth a lot of initiatives to get the community involved in making a range of things that, one could eat with millet, including food for, for hens and chickens. And so we really were reaching out to as many people as we could. This is at the Cal Academy. There were bakers and, writers and a lot of people who got involved at that point in this initiative. And we really, expanded this approach over the years. This was in 2016 that we, expanded this. And 2017 was until when we had official funding for the project. This was the team at that point. And I just want to sort of end with this, which is, I think, something that Dawn had asked me to add as part of, this webinar, which is what did we really learn? So we learned that millets do indeed, we did experiments to show that millets indeed require lesser water, and they do grow under different sort of geographical agroclimatic conditions that at least existed in this the Northern California patch that we experimented with. Millet processing was the largest roadblock that we've observed in our very limited experience over the 3 years. Even though our farmer collaborators were able to grow millets and they were able to grow decent yields of millets successfully, it was very difficult to process the millets once they had harvested them. The short shelf life after the dehulling and producing flour, that requires often local and small scale processing units to be distributed across the landscape in which millet grows. That is generally what happens in places like India, which are growing a lot of millets. There are very small scale processing centers. We definitely miss that, and I feel like that's what is really missing in the landscape in North America at this point. I think I read a discussion on the group, this very nice email group that the NAMA has created. This seems to be the biggest thing that we were missing at that point. And of course, the innovation with products, which today has thankfully become way lesser a problem. A lot of great products are hitting the market, which include millet. Those were the things that I feel we really felt were issues that were plaguing the low use of millets in the field and in the consumer vocabulary. This question is something that I feel a lot of us ask, that why are still rice and wheat so popular? Why are they so popular today? I think I wanted to put this last also because, Nate, you initiated this as part of what you were saying right at the beginning. Millets are, for various reasons, socio-political, of course, part of those are very big reasons why we don't have millets in our everyday vocabulary. But I feel like of course, there's a lot of subsidies, etc., that are offered to grains such as wheat, rice, and corn today. But also, wheat and rice, which are processed, have longer shelf lives as compared to the whole grain that is millet, the flour that comes from millet, and other such things, which include the oil and things like that, which make it difficult to store millets. And so that adds to why people don't buy a bulk of millets and then use it over time, but you can do that for flour, all-purpose flour and rice and things like that. Shelf life, I think, is another very big reason why millets are not as popular as wheat and rice today. And because wheat and rice are popular and have longer shelf life, the variety of things that one can make with them are larger. So that is the part that we all as community need to innovate with. Add more recipes which use millets as ingredients. So just some perspectives from bakers and brewers. A baker friend of mine says that the gluten network that wheat is capable of producing when combined with water makes the bread lighter with a clean flavor. Using millets in combination with wheat flour is often a great way to get the best of both worlds. And a brewer friend of mine who uses millets extensively in their brews in India says that the unavailability of malted millet or millet in the way that can be used easily. So again, processing of millet to make it more available are roadblocks that they are slowly trying to get over. So I'd like to end with just thanking everybody who's been involved with the Millet Project, starting with UC Berkeley and the Berkeley Food Institute, projects such as CLEAR and Transforming Education for Sustainable Futures, which is a project I very recently worked with, and of course ISA Pune, which is my home institute and really encourages me to be part of this movement today. Thank you so much for your attention.
Oh, our thanks to you, Amrita, because getting up and staying up at the hour that you're up right now, 2:30, 3 o'clock in India, is really beyond what most people would do.
No, it's my pleasure,
for example. But thank you very much. Obviously, the Millet Project, along with a handful of other public universities in the U.S., was right at the vanguard of thinking about millets in the North American diets. And thank you for that. The Millet Project is still alive. We will be trying to reach out to them once again and see
Yes.
what we can do. Are you able to stick around for questions? So
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
okay.
I
All
also
right.
will be there for Nate's talk for sure. So I'll be around. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. And as I said before,
Thank
that's a
you.
beautiful photo of all the different millets. But okay, well, let's move on to Nate, and then we can go back to questions after Nate's presentation. Nate Bloom serves as the Chief Executive Officer at Blue Milo and Sorghum United. Sorghum United is an international NGO serving to advance education and markets development for sorghum and adjacent small grains. He's an expert on grain sorghum production and marketing with a focus on value-added agriculture processing for sorghum-based products. Mr. Bloom has represented the sorghum and millets industry in Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Vietnam, Germany, France, Switzerland, Italy, Jordan, Great Britain, Scotland, Australia, Japan, United Emirates, Egypt, and the United Nations FAO. He has also worked with international stakeholders with regard to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, hosting an Independent Food Systems Summit in August of 2021. Mr. Bloom served as the executive director of the Nebraska Grain Sorghum Board and the Nebraska Sorghum Producers Association from 2019 to 2023. Nate has also served on the USDA Grains, Feed, and Oilseeds Ag Trade Advisory Committee, called ATAC. The ATAC advised trade policy to the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. Most important, he's an alumnus of the University of Nebraska, class of 2019, the Nebraska Leadership Education and Agriculture Development Program, and recently served as vice president of the Nebraska LEAD Alumni Association. LEAD is Leadership Education and Agriculture Development. Finally, Mr. Bloom received a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Nebraska. He also enjoys volunteering for local nonprofits and organizing community events in his free time. Obviously, Nate, you have a lot of experience, inside and outside the millet and sorghum world, and very active and with so much energy. We're really looking forward to hearing you today. Thanks so much it's also late where Nate is, by the way. It's like, 10, 11 at night. So thank you as well.
Thank you, Jonathan, and buenos aires from Italy. I'm actually in Rome tonight for the World Food Forum at the United Nations FAO. That bio, I realize, needs to be updated because with our global organization that we'll talk about, I've actually added several more countries to that. So let's add Egypt, Senegal, India, Taiwan, Cambodia, and Singapore to that list just this year.
Oh,
so
wow. Okay, great.
It's hard work, but you can find it if you try. So anyway, so let's jump in. I'm going to glaze over some of our slides for the same reasons that Dr. Hazra did, because we don't want to preach to the choir. This is a presentation I've given throughout the year that, quite frankly, is intended for folks who are not as familiar with the health and environmental benefits of sorghum, though we will touch on some of the other research that's been done in the field. So let's start by talking about what is Sorghum United. First of all, Sorghum United doesn't just work in sorghum. We actually work with millets as well. Our stakeholders, we have over 100 stakeholders. Actually, that figure probably needs to be updated too, because our global network continues to grow. Excuse me. But our stakeholders, like Joni is a good example on this call, aren't just working with sorghum, but they're also working with millets. Now we chose Sorghum United rather than Sorghum and Millets United because, frankly, out of respect to NAMA, because we didn't want to cause any confusion with that organization who we very much value the partnership with. So what is our mission? Well, we really want to facilitate producer resources, provide consumer education, and develop value-added markets while empowering people through connection chains globally. Now, what does that mean? What does that actually mean? So in my travels and in my work, one thing that I've noticed is that there are great people doing great work in sorghum and millets around the world, whether that's at the university level or in the private sector, creating new products, Maybe they have a small business incubator type situation, but these systems tend to be disconnected, even locally. I experienced this when I was in Senegal. Government of Senegal has a small business incubator, but they're not actually connected with their farmers who would be supplying them the grain, so they're subject to getting whatever that the farmers grow. And so that's one thing that we can do to foster growth within the industry. What we're really focused on is developing regional value chains. There are great organizations in the world that work on the commodity space. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But as a farm kid, you'll understand why I'm not as much of a fan of the commodity space. Not that we don't need it, but we need to supplement it with something else. And then a lot of it is markets development through consumer education. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So I'm going to back up just for a second. And this is a book that I hope that if you get a chance to read, you'll read, because I use this as I cite this book actually often as an example of why our work, though it seems daunting, is not undoable. And this is a story about David Fairchild. David Fairchild was born in Kansas in the late 1800s he was the son of a college president. As a result of his upbringing, they hosted a lot of people from around the world that would come and speak at the university. And David became very interested in agriculture and global systems. And so when he graduated and got a job working for the local corn farmers, he tried to convince them to send him to Fiji, I believe it was Fiji, to go and research plant diseases. And of course, they told him, "You're out of your mind. What does it have to do with Kansas?" But he went anyway and got a job at USDA, and USDA sent him to Italy to go and do some research work there. But on the way, he met a gentleman who was kind of a wealthy bachelor, didn't really have a lot of direction, was just traveling the world. And over the course of time, I won't spoil everything, they came up with a scheme that they would introduce new plant species to North America, which North American agriculture at the time was really, it was beans, wheat, barley. It was pretty bland. And so what they did was they set up the first office of seed introduction, I believe, at the USDA. And because of his work, we now have in North America everything from avocados in California to mangoes in Florida to even the Japanese cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C. They literally introduced thousands of species to a market that was not familiar with them. So why is that important? We're talking about basically rebuilding, because these are grains that we used to know as a species and we've forgotten over the last few decades. We're looking at rebuilding these markets, and we have all these tools. We have internet, we have phone, we have video calls. It's like the freaking Jetsons here, right? I mean, we've got all this technology, and we're only really looking at sorghum and millets, which are one or two categories within the food space. Now, he was able to do this with hundreds of plant species in an age where there was no radio, no television, no air travel. And so I think that that's a really optimistic view of what we can do. If he was able to accomplish this, where he's not only introducing new plant species from around the world, but actually creating new markets, there's no reason we shouldn't be able to do the same for sorghum and millets with the tools that we have at our disposal. I think that's very important. And again, I highly recommend people to read that book. So let's step back for a second. Let's talk about the modern commodity marketing model. Now, again, I'm a farm kid, so I know this really quite well. And I joked earlier before the call started that the only reason I don't work directly on the farm is because I grow crops as well as I grow a full head of hair. But the reality is the commodity marketing model is actually one of the things that is the reason why I don't work on the farm. Because in order to be competitive in the commodity marketing model, this is the traditional marketing model that North American farmers and most farmers in the world operate within. You can't control the price of your product. In fact, the industry tells you you should grow as much as you possibly can. And so to be competitive, you're going to do that every year. Your focus is on yields, on yields, on yields, right? It's never on value. But guess what? Your neighbor's going to do the same thing. So what happens when harvest happens at the same time and you both have record yields, which, by the way, you spent more money on your input costs to get, and you take those products to market? Well, guess what? Basic supply and demand shows us that the price for your product is going to decrease. So now you have a higher input cost and a lower ROI, lower margins. for what you're putting on the market. And frankly, this is an important model, by the way, and don't get me wrong, I'm not dogging it, because we need this model in order to provide inexpensive foods to feed disparate populations, both at home and around the world. However, thinking that it is the only solution is not good for farmers. In fact, the only way they can compete is by consolidation. Our family farm was a 4th-generation farm. We just had to sell it this last year. And we weren't big. We weren't big fish. The farmers we sold it to, or they actually rented it out for a few years before we sold it, farmed 17,000 acres in Nebraska, and they're not the largest farmers. They're not a corporation, by the way, just not to pick on them. They're actually a family farm. It's several brothers and their kids. So I'm fine with that. But the point is that this is what happens in the commodity marketing model. Not only that, the area that I grew up in, we used to grow beans, wheat, and milo in rotation. Now it is corn on soybeans. So it is literally a monocropping system that focuses on volume over value. And when it comes to the industry of sorghum in particular, let's talk about our trading partners. 80% of the world's supply of sorghum in particular goes to China. 93% of the world's supply of sorghum goes to China. What this means is when China's buying, that's great for the industry, although at that volume, there is opportunity for trade price manipulation. And when they're not buying, like when we saw during the trade dispute with China between the United States a few years ago, sorghum was the first grain that shot across the bow. All of a sudden, prices got even lower. So what we're saying is, hey, great, we want those international trade partners like China, but why don't we supplement those opportunities with some value-added markets locally, not only in the US, but in other parts of the world? And that's where we talk about the underdevelopment of regional value chains and how we can do better for not only conventional farmers in North America, but also smallholder farmers in other parts of the world. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment. And then if we want to really get serious about talking about carbon, and again, I love trade, so don't get me wrong on this, but all this conversation is about carbon sequestration, right? And carbon released in the atmosphere. And everybody likes to point the finger at agriculture and how methane from cows is contributing to climate change. That may be part of the case, but the elephant in the room here is that transoceanic shipping is actually the largest producer of carbon in the atmosphere. And again, not that we're against shipping, but by golly, we got to be doing something different. We can't just handle it on the back end. We have to handle it on the front end as well. So let's talk about supplementing value-based markets. So again, this is not a zero-sum game. We can do commodity marketing model as well as value-added. So what I'm talking about is we're talking about mitigating commodity market volatility risk. Again, commodity markets, you cannot control your price. But what we'd like to do, and not only in Nebraska, but other places that are geographically central, let's say like Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, or in West Africa, let's talk about Senegal or Ghana. In Asia, let's talk about parts of India, things like this, maybe even Vietnam, where we can have value-added processing located proximate to the production of the grain. Now, it's not a new concept. We're not talking about reinventing the wheel here. We're just talking about putting new tread on it. And what I mean by that is that Dr. Hazra mentioned the birdseed industry earlier. In many years, South Dakota actually produces more sorghum than Nebraska does, even though they're further north of us. Why is that? Because they have these processing plants for birdseed facilities, and they have the growth of sorghum surrounding that, so the farmers have an opportunity to direct contract. Now, we think when farmers have an opportunity to direct contract with a local processor, they can not only mitigate their market price on the commodity level, but they can also lock in higher values through that direct contracting, where they're not just planting a seed, but they're planting intentionally a seed that their end user needs because they're having that communication before they ever do the planting. From the processing standpoint, having processing located proximate to the production of grain in an area that is geographically central means that you can decrease your supply costs both on the front end and the back end. You're close to where the grain's coming from, and places like Nebraska, you're 2.5 days by truck from anywhere in the continental US. So I'm not just bragging up Nebraska because I live there. I'm just using it as an example in this case. And not only that, by the way, when you have processing in these areas that are proximate to the production of grain, which often are very rural, this also gives you an opportunity to create jobs and economic opportunities for industries that are ancillary to agriculture. So in the end, everybody wins. And I think this is a great way for us to go forward. So again, I'm not going to read point for point off the slide, but I'm happy to take questions at any time, okay? So a few years ago, this is actually 2019 data, but when I was the director of the Nebraska Sorghum Board, I was presenting to a conference in Montpellier, France. And what I wanted to look at the time was, we talk about the value for sorghum and for millets. What are those values? So I wanted to quantify, if I could, through market research, the different attributes and traits of sorghum and what people are willing to pay for those. And so I broke down sorghum into some of these categories. Functional foods. So we talk about nutraceuticals, food as health. At that time, the global value for that market was $173.26 billion. And now there's a bit of a typo here. That compound annual growth rate at the time is 7.7, so not 77%. That would be outrageous. We look at non-GMO, which, by the way, I always tell our farmers, the research might say that non-GMOs or that GMOs are safe, and that's fine. We don't need to get into an argument about that. The reality is that if you have a non-GMO product and your customers want non-GMO, don't argue with them. Don't argue with them. Just sell it to them. It's really that simple. And at that time, the value of non-GMO, the global value, was almost $1 billion with a compound annual growth rate of 16.5%, which is amazing. We can look at ethically labeled or sustainable, and all these numbers have grown since then. Gluten-free, which Dr. Hazard mentioned. Again, look at that compound annual growth rate back in 2019, 4 years ago, almost 10%. So there's a lot of money to be made in these grains if we can market them correctly, which, by the way, is a big thing I'd like to just mention today. I go to a lot of conferences. I was just in Montpellier, France in June for the Global Sorghum Conference. And the thing I always hear at these conferences, I hear these great presentations on research in regard to genomics and yield increases and all this other stuff, but nobody is talking about how to sell it. So why are we spending so much time on growing more? And we're not spending any time on how do you actually talk to consumers and sell it. I mean, it seems like a short-sighted venture in my experience. This is a neat slide, and I don't want to dive too far into the climate impacts because I know time is an issue here. You can see the full presentation, which takes about an hour. Actually, it's on our YouTube and on our website as well. But this is a really unique slide. It came from New Mexico State University. And you can see the blue represents the water table, right? So the higher the blue is, the more the water is sequestered in the soil there. And so when they plant the cover crop, the water table goes down a little bit. They follow with sorghum, it actually goes back up. And then you see the cover crop again, followed by sorghum, and it once again goes back up. I mean, it's not just drought resistant, it's literally renewable. It's amazing. This is another great table. We did not produce this. This is from the United Sorghum Checkoff Program. We are not affiliated with the United Sorghum Checkoff Program. We are a non-taxpayer funded NGO, but we really appreciate when they put out good content and good work, and we're happy to give credit where credit is due. But this is an amazing table that compares the nutritive qualities of sorghum versus several other grains. You could find this, again, just through a quick Google search. And most of the things we're going to talk about, you can find through a quick Google search, by the way. And I'm always happy to provide more context at a time when we have more leverage to expand on some of these thoughts. Just a few research things that I would like to touch on outside of Dr. Hazra's research. So for a long time, when I worked in sorghum advocacy, you almost kind of felt like a snake oil salesman because you were saying all these things that we knew instinctively were true about sorghum, or anecdotally we knew was true. And within the last several years, we're actually starting to see peer-reviewed research papers that are backing that up. So no longer do I feel like a snake oil salesman. Not that I couldn't sell ketchup to a woman in white gloves, but it's nice to be backed up by real data. So in Nebraska, where I live, we have something called the Food for Health Center. They're one of 6 institutions on the entire planet that studies the human gut microbiome. last year, after 6 years of research, they published 2 papers, not 1, 2 papers in the journal Nature, talking about how sorghum can help rebalance the human gut microbiome, which makes sense because it was one of the first grains that we cultivated as a species, and we evolved alongside that grain. And so what they found are, and I'll show you here just in a minute, let me go to the next slide. What has been found, not only through their research, but then through corroborative research, over 200 studies which were done, which were put together in a meta-analysis by Dr. James Painter and Maggie McGinnis. These are studies that are done globally, many different institutions, all peer-reviewed papers, all published, and they all corroborate the same things. We see a decrease in inflammatory disease effects. We see cardiac benefits, anti-diabetic benefits, anti-carcinogenic benefits, and more. And I'm always happy to share that meta-analysis, by the way. It was funded by the United Sorghum Checkout Program, which is funded by taxpayer dollars, which means that it is public information and we have access to it. And I'm happy to share that if anyone would like to read it. The health benefits, whether they derive from polyphenols or tannins, is a point of debate within the industry, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because the fact is that they're there. Not that it doesn't matter, but I mean, you get what I'm saying. So this is a big conversation that our organization has. And again, we have a global organization. I'm in Rome at the FAO, where I was here in December for the opening ceremony of the International Year of Millets. The question, and I just had this conversation with leadership there today, is how do we keep the conversation going after the International Year is over? Our organization did a few things ahead of the International Year. For example, we studied the International Year of Quinoa in 2013. What made them successful? What were some of their challenges? What were some of the things on the back end that we should try to avoid? For example, quinoa became so popular that the peoples of South America and the Andes, where it's grown, could no longer afford their own staple food. So how do we avoid that? And, you know, there's a lot of different ways we do that, but most of it is around value-added processing in regional value chains that can allow for local value in addition to global value for these grains. At any rate, it's a conversation we're continuing to have. I'm deeply grateful, and we're deeply grateful as an organization, to the delegation from India, who is largely responsible for the International Year of Millets. They had a Year of Millets in India prior to the International Year. I was just in India for about a month in August and September, and there is a conversation amongst Indian leadership about, at least internally within the country, having a decade of millets. That's fantastic. The problem is outside of Africa and Asia, the International Year of Millets has largely fallen on deaf ears, and I'm talking about Europe, North America, and South America. So, and frankly, even Australia. And so our organization is really having conversations about how do we keep that capacity up, and we think we can do that through connectivity and value chain development, in addition to our consumer education pieces. Speaking of consumer education pieces, so we have a series of children's books we've published. All 3 of these on the screen are now available on Amazon or at sorghosquad.com. These were really aimed at kids between the ages of 9 and 13. They're a comic book or graphic novel style series. I'm a big comic book nerd, so it was really easy to come up with this concept and move forward with it, because it was just like reading something in my collection at home. What we wanted to do was make them educational, so there's a great place for them in classrooms, but we also wanted to make them a little bit fun. And frankly, they're not just aimed at the children, they're aimed at middle-class families with some disposable income that are interested in the nutrition that they're giving their children, as well as wanting to do their part in regard to environmental sustainability and income disparity globally. And so that's really what these books focus on. We're hoping for a big Q4 for these books. So if you can help us spread the word, that would be great. I've actually already written the 4th one, but we're pumping the brakes to see how they do during the Christmas book buying season. If they're successful, we'll move on and do at least 3 or 4 more next year. The crazy thing to me is we just published the first one in June. The second one came out in August. The third one just came out a couple of weeks ago. The crazy thing is that, I mean, I've already got a huge marketing team because my phone has been blowing up for like 4 months now. But in the last couple of days, I've had like 5 or 6 different companies blowing up my phone while I'm in Rome and meetings, by the way, trying to talk to me about doing screenplays and other things. So I mean, it's a great problem to have. I'm not going to complain about it. So we're pretty confident that they're a good product, but distribution is always a big key to success. So this, by the way, helps fund our work at Sorghum United. We are an NGO. We technically, as a nonprofit, could go to our global partners, like some of our big seed dealers, for example, that support us, and we could ask them for a check. But the reality is that we're talking to our people, our stakeholders, about entrepreneurialism and economic self-sustainability. And as a matter of principle, we believe that we need to put our money where our mouth is. So we're trying to do this.
Yes, Nate warned us that this might happen, but it's very timely because we're we're toward the end of our hour, and there are. Sorry, Nate, you got cut off there. You got cut off there.
No, that's
but now I'm going to cut you off. But it's a really great because we're running out of time. But there's a couple questions still out there, and maybe we can take a couple minutes, even if we run over a little bit. Thank you very much. That was really interesting, and the comic book concept is a great example of economic development. But in any case, I'm sure the rest of that looks good too.
yeah.
But let me get to these questions.
Yeah, sorry about that. Having to take questions, and if anybody would like to see the full presentation, just give me an email, and I'd be happy to do it. But to the questions, let's make time for those.
Yeah, you got a lot going on, and it's all really exciting, Nate. So thanks so much for sharing it with us. One of the questions that came a while ago when you were first starting talking was it's related to non-GMO. What do you think is driving the interest in non-GMO crops besides fear factor?
I think that's not besides fear factor. It's emotion. I mean, it's it's like a lot of things in the political world. Things become politicized, and when they become politicized, they're no longer factually based. They're become emotionally based. Listen, I can tell you several different research papers that have gone and looked at GMOs, and they said that GMOs are safe. But the reality is, when I go to Pizza Hut and I order a pepperoni pizza, they don't start off by telling me why pepperoni's bad and I should have sausage. They just sell me the pizza. And our farmers need to do the same thing. Don't get into an argument. The customer doesn't have to be right. Just sell them what they want.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, this is kind of a general question for both Rita and Nate that Don was wondering about, and that is for each of you. What one piece of counsel would you have for community and regional initiatives for promoting millets and sorghum? Amrita, are you still there?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
What counsel would you have to promote community and regional initiatives related to millets and sorghum? Sorghum being a millet.
So I guess the couple of things that I think we observed as part of the Millet Project, and I think I continue to observe here in India, which is Nate, you're absolutely right that the International Year of Millet has really picked up traction in India, but I'm guessing it's not as you've been traveling and you've probably been getting a better sense of this. It's not the same across. So even I wondered what would be sort of initiatives that would help that. And I feel like I think it's two things. It's if people need to be coming together to have these conversations. And so because millet has always been this grassroots level movement, and it's not really yet part of our everyday salads and our everyday food. If there are more local sort of conversations that are happening at university levels or school levels or town hall level kind of meetings, those I think are the best way to get this moving. And secondly is the processing part, which I think is something that's you have to have local processing units, and they have to be robust machines that work, but they aren't you're not going to require large scale machinery at this point, because there are going to be handful of people starting to grow these. But unless we are not encouraging those handful of people, it's not going to move further. So investing in these local processing units, which is essentially how most of Indian millet cultivation runs. It's small scale processing units that are there at the village level, the block level, the district level, which is arranged for these things to be there. I feel those are the two things that really will help at a regional level to keep this momentum, to increase the momentum that is being generated.
Excellent. I think
couldn't
Nate
agree.
alluded to that as well, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Dr. Hazra, and that's one thing again that we really focus on is that value-added processing. For example, in Nebraska or in the U.S., we have very little value-added processing for sorghum in the domestic market. This is a problem that we're working to resolve. I did see some examples of where this is coming along in India during my time there, and it was quite inspirational to see what they can do. To your point about grassroots, I would tell you that, so if you're asking for my counsel to somebody who's trying to affect change within this space, do not rely upon the existing agricultural industry, the existing paradigm, because what we're talking about represents systemic change, and systems don't like to change. That's not to vilify anybody. We like corn and wheat and soybeans just fine. But the reality is that the industry is predisposed towards those, and that means that change is difficult. So from a grassroots perspective, which is really the strategy that we take, it's because we know that if we can get enough consumers and enough demand driving the need for change, then the industry cannot stop it. It's really a populist approach, so to speak. So that's why we were reaching out to, again, those middle-class families and those education systems, because if we can increase the demand, then the tidal wave becomes much more difficult to stop.
Excellent, excellent. We're just getting started. NAMA's getting started. Sorghum United's getting started. The whole millets movement's getting started. We'll be crossing paths again. I know with Amrita and Nate. And I just wanted to thank you so much for taking the time and an oddball time of day for you, for being here and sharing what you know. There's more to come, I'm certain. I wanted to also thank Claire Smith of Tofola Farms in Michigan for suggesting this topic. And it's a topic we need to explore more deeply as we move forward. But once again, thank you for being here. Thanks everyone for participating. We have another webinar a month from now, and we'll be letting you know about that, and hope to see you then. Thank you. Be safe travels.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for listening here.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.